welcome back to Building Extraordinary Brands, the podcast where we dive into the art and science of creating standout brands and businesses. Today we have a phenomenal episode lined up with not one, but two expert guests who have mastered the art of content creation, marketing, and brand strategy. First, we have Hrabren Bankov, or Harry for short. It's a bit hard for me to say, but he said Harry's his usual name. His mum calls him that, and that's the only one who does. Harry's an AI-obsessed organic marketing guru, and he believes that successful social media marketing is an 80-20 split between understanding psychology and tech. Harry's worked with renowned brands like UNICEF and has helped personal brand owners grow over 7 million followers organically. He's also scaled his own personal brand to more than 600,000 followers across Insta, LinkedIn, and Threads. Joining Harry is Rob Murray. He's a seasoned brand strategist who helps creative entrepreneurs position their brands inside their customers' minds and develop strategies to ensure repeat purchases. He's got over 13 years of experience in the industry, including managing the identity for global financial publisher Treasury Today. He's worked with major brands like HSBC, Citi, and JP Morgan. He's also the co-founder and CEO of Sphere. In this episode, we're going to explore the strategies and insights these experts use to create compelling content and grow massive followings, so you can too. We're going to dive into the power of content creation, effective growth tactics, practical applications, and the future of social media marketing. So there's a lot to cover, especially with two guys here, or three, but we're going to get there. So welcome to the show, Harry and Rob. It's good. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for the phenomenal introduction.
Absolutely. Thanks. Likewise.
Awesome. So I'm going to do this like one question each, and if you want to butt in with each other's answers, please do. Let's have some fun. I do want to start with like the power of content creation, because for my business has been built on that since I started in 2007. Like it's all been content and SEO, and that's driven my business. And you guys are killing it on social with your huge followings and like pumping out so much content. So I just want to understand your approach to content creation and why it's important for building a following. So Harry, I'm going to start with you and then...
Absolutely. So when it comes down to content, for me, it really does come down to identifying what your purpose is. Most people aren't on social media for the sake of it. They do have some businesses in the back end, and businesses run on one really specific currency, and that currency is called trust. If you do not trust that business, you're not going to purchase from that business. And the higher the ticket of the item that you're selling is, the more trust you have to earn. The best way to earn trust is through the so-called reciprocity, aka I scratch your back, you scratch my back. Content enables us to do that. And for me, after growing more than 7 million followers with phenomenal personal brands and experts, including Robbie right here, content is the glue that ties everything together. You cannot grow a personal brand, you cannot grow on social, you cannot grow outside of social unless you have something valuable to offer. And nailing that valuable asset and making sure that you're utilizing it and you're positioning yourself as the go-to expert in that category is done through posting consistently, staying top of mind, and mastering the art of content.
Well said. Rob, did you want to add anything to that one?
Yeah, so I resonate a lot with what Hrabren said, and so for me, there's a lot of it that is about trust, and also to kind of add onto what Hrabren mentioned is that it's about trust and it's also about relationships. Anytime that you put content out into the world, people are engaging with you. You're having a conversation. You're sharing something that means something to you with them, and so you're ultimately trying to find those messages that mean something to people, who they want to be, what provides them with value, and what helps them in their journey. So understanding what role, what relationship you play inside your ideal audience's mind is one massive driver for really creating a successful brand and a successful content marketing strategy.
So
Amen.
How do you go about positioning a brand in a customer's mind, through content?
I love that. And so this is for me, right, Jacob?
Yes, yeah. Follow-up question.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, kind of tying into what I said about the whole relationship aspect, you play a role inside your customer's mind, right? So when you want to position yourself inside your customer's mind, you have to ask yourself, what role am I playing inside their life? Who am I to them? And so there's a lot of different relationships you can play. You take an example from like Nike, and they play the role of a motivator and inspirer, or you take a look at someone more like Gary Vee. And yes, he plays a little bit of a role of a motivator, but he's also an educator, right? So really defining that role for yourself really helps you categorize what content you want to create in the first place.
So how can someone go about, deciding what type of content to put out there?
Great question. Yeah, so I would start with first doing a little bit of research into what is currently out there, right? So a lot of it kind of starts off with, let's see what the landscape looks like. So that's where I would start. And then I would look into myself and understand, what am I actually good at? Am I good at educating people, or am I more comfortable with sharing a bit more of like a motivational aspect? Or am I comfortable with being an entertainer? Am I funny? Am I a little bit goofy? Am I like fun to interact with? Looking at those types of things will really help you identify who you can be for your customers. So it's a little bit of internal kind of discovery and a little bit of external discovery as well, to understand what works alongside what can you do that works.
Okay. Harry, I know you have some things to say, so
Absolutely. So two things that I would like to touch upon. Rob is mentioning in terms of the role that you're going to be playing, there is a really interesting concept called the brand archetypes that essentially showcases 12 different roles that you could take in your brand positioning. And it's definitely something which I recommend anyone listening to the podcast who hasn't already dived into, look into, because it's an incredibly valuable resource. And even though it's, again, 12 templates, they may not perfectly fit you, they will give you a direction. And starting is better than staying in the same place, because when you're staying in the same place in a world which is moving constantly forwards, you're actually falling behind. That's one of the aspects that I wanted to mention. The other one is understanding that for me, building a good content strategy comes down to what Rob said, internal. You have to look inwards and you have to ask yourself, what makes me me? Excavate essentially what are the traits that people commonly see in yourself. And when I started building out my personal brand, I vividly remember that I looked at every conversation that I recently had with my best clients, and I started pulling out characteristics that people were using to describe me. And those characteristics were the foundation of the brand that I started building afterwards. So you have to look inwards, you have to excavate what makes you you. You have to look outwards. You have to look at competitors and do your competitive benchmarking. And then one extra element, which I do believe is crucial on social, where everything is relationship based, as Rob said, understanding your ideal customer avatar, understanding who you're creating the content for. And in the intertwined areas between these three elements, you can imagine a Venn diagram with three circles: yourself, your competitors, your audience. The intertwined areas is where your brand should live.
Yeah, the classic 3 C's there you're describing. So thank you. I won't go too much deeper into that because that's kind of like branding in a whole. And I do want to focus on like content marketing. But there's a rule that you often talk about, Harry, which is like the 80-20 rule in content creation. What's that all about, between psychology and tech, and like, what's your thoughts?
Absolutely. I would even go as far and say that 99% of social media success is about psychology, and then 1% is about understanding the different languages of the social media platforms. I do generally believe that every platform has a specific language, and you can look at social media as different countries. And some countries will have really similar languages. They will sound alike. They may just be different dialects even of the same language. Imagine Instagram and TikTok. Imagine English, British English, and American English. Really similar. There are nuances, but in general, you can understand each other and you can create the same content for both platforms. Then there are platforms which are vividly different. Think of Facebook and Threads. these are completely separate languages. They're in completely separate language group. Let's say Facebook is all about the Cyrillic language, so let's say Bulgarian, and then Facebook is all the traditional Latin languages. You cannot post the same type of content that you're posting on threads on Facebook and expect success. That's the packaging. And then the psychology is understanding that at the end of the day, no matter the platform, you're creating content for people. And people have the same psychological elements and facets everywhere. We are drawn, for example, by negativity, no matter on which platform or medium we are consuming content for. So for me, success on social media really does come down to 8% or even 99% understanding the human psychology, and then 1% understanding the.
Okay. And Rob, what's your take on that? Do you think it comes down to psychology and a little bit of tech?
Yeah, agreed. So I know that there's been that kind of initial saying of 80% psychology and 20% technology, but I'm certainly with Hrabren when he says that it's 99% psychology, because the psychology feeds a lot into the technology in the first place. So people go on Facebook less for looking at messages from brands, less to look at like for learning, and more just for keeping in touch with family members that live halfway across the world, you know. And then with Instagram, it is more of like a binge watching platform where you kind of scroll through, you see something funny, you see something entertaining, you double tap it. So like all of this technology has been based on psychology. So you know the psychology. Think of why has this platform been built for people? What do they go onto this platform to do? When you understand that, that's how you can create the best type of content for that platform.
All right. Well, let's kind of pivot into strategies for growing a huge following. We've talked about like the power of content creation and some of the psychology behind it. But let's like get into, you've got like 7 million, you've built up 7 million followers for your clients. Like, what are some of the key strategies you share with them for such growth?
Absolutely. For me, the number one issue that organic marketing has is because I come from performance marketing and because my background is in computer science, when I first started organic marketing, I had a really solid base and I knew what I was looking for. So when I saw most marketers in my niche just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks, I was quite shocked. So I decided to actually start implementing a few of the lessons that I have grown into to understand through computer science and performance marketing, and start looking at my Instagram page or any other social media page as a landing page. And as a landing page grows, you essentially need two things: traffic and conversions. In the context of Instagram, traffic is profile visits. How many people actually see your profile? In the context of Instagram, conversions comes down to how many of the people who see your profile turn into followers. You can dive super deep into this. You can take a look at your non-follower to follower reach. You can understand what type of audience you're utilizing. You can understand your traffic quality. You can even calculate your unfollow rate. But first and foremost, understanding the principle that your Instagram is a landing page, as with any landing page, if you want that to succeed, you need traffic and conversions. And looking at these metrics and understanding these metrics gives you clarity. Because you cannot create anything, you cannot create a branding strategy, you cannot create a content strategy, you cannot create a growth strategy without having clarity. Clarity gives you power. So for me, if someone understands this birth foundation.
Okay, so you're focusing a lot on metrics here, but if you're starting a new account or you may not have a huge following, how do you
Yep. You either extrapolate the time period that you're looking at. So for example, for smaller profiles that may not have 1,000 profile visits per month, which is usually the metric that I go for in order to be statistically relevant, we take a look at 90-day period, we take a look at 6-month period. And then for people who may not even have those metrics at these specific time periods, we do what Rob mentioned earlier, and that's competitive benchmarking. So if you don't have the metrics, go to someone that already has. If you don't have the audience, go to someone that has already built that audience. And you can find, again, a lot of these metrics which you are really interested in by leveraging the profiles and the insights from other people. There is a really famous saying which says, great people look and learn only from their mistakes.
There you go. Thank you for sharing that, Harry. Rob, what's your approach with achieving such massive growth on your profile and with your customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Harry said, so a lot of it comes down to, obviously, again, understanding traffic and conversions, understanding what's happening out there. So if I was to do this from the beginning and build it from the ground up, I'd first be looking at what other people are doing and then trying to find my own spin on that. There is an element of having to experiment to find what you're good at. And so when it comes to building out that following, I mean, talking from experience, when I first started, I literally just pumped out what I thought would work based on what I'd seen other people do. And so I was finding what other people were doing. I'm like, okay, how can I put a little bit of me in that? Like, how can I say that, but from me? And so that's where I then started. And at the beginning, I was like, okay, well, people aren't really liking this. Clearly, there's a problem, right? So it was a lot of trial and error to really find my own voice, find my creative style, my way of talking, my way of writing content. So all of this was so new, and it was basically building muscle, right? Building a muscle through repetition, and also, again, consistently looking, okay, what's this person doing? Wow, I love that idea. How can I speak about that content from my own angle? And then it just starts to fuel that creativity and create this engine where you're being inspired by the people around you and pumping out content that comes from you. So that would be my approach to really building out that content engine that Hrabren has just, well, take my tip. If I had a hat on, I'd be tipping my hat.
Yeah, I think I should have asked you first, Rob, because you started with like looking at others and getting inspired, and you get that train moving, and then you can analyze with Harry's approach, with like looking at the data and analyzing and improving, and I guess they go in tandem. So would there be any other tactics you would add to growing fast for our listeners?
I wouldn't say there are tactics, and I wouldn't even. How is it expected that other people will know what sort of positioning, what sort of value, what sort of person you would like to be on social media if you yourself haven't figured that out yet? And imagine if in that moment you go viral, you gain hundreds of thousands of followers. At this moment, you become trapped. Your identity becomes the identity that other people set for yourself. Everyone who is looking at, let me try this hack, let me utilize mother and child growth methodologies, let me utilize follow and follow, let me utilize all of these bullshit tactics that are out there, should really reconsider and should really understand what is it that they're looking for. Because if we're really looking at building a brand that builds us and positions us as a trustable source, if we are there for the long term and we want to build a business that doesn't last 6 months but lasts 6 years plus, we want to do things sustainably. We want to do things in a way that is built to last. Just like Rome wasn't built in a day, you shouldn't really expect your social media empire to be built either. For me, the most underrated element comes down to, again, the 80-20 rule. It's not only about the psychology of understanding others and understanding what other people think about and how they consume your content. It's also about understanding your own psychology as a content creator and being able to navigate the mental struggles and the left and right jabs that Instagram and all of these social media platforms throw at you all the time. Because the reality is, it doesn't really matter how good you are. It doesn't really matter how well you write. It doesn't really matter how well you design. It doesn't really matter how well you speak on camera. If you do not stick on Instagram for long enough, it will spit you out. So for me, understanding the mentality, having a strong foundations from a brand perspective, having a strong foundation from a perspective of building out your legacy and making sure you know your why, and then sticking with it for long enough will make everything else fall into place. You do not need to pay thousands for coaching. You do not need to pay thousands for courses. You do not need to buy for long enough.
Yeah, that consistency.
Sorry about my rant.
So
yeah,
important.
This is.
No, it's very important, and I love what you said. It's not just about the psychology of others. It's really about knowing yourself, and it comes back to what you said right at the start of this. Like, why are you here in the first place? What are your goals? Like, what value are you trying to give, and like, what are you selling, or what do you want to achieve from everything you're putting out there? So it all works together. I guess from here, rather than like growth tactics, maybe it's about efficiencies. So I want to go to the dark side and talk about AI for a little bit and just understand if you guys are using it or how you see the landscape changing with content creation. Just have a chat around AI and content marketing in general.
Absolutely. I do use AI quite frequently. And for me, it really does come down to understand what the overall function of AI is and how it really impacts the overall ecosystem. And in order to understand that, you have to understand another foundational rule, and that's supply and demand on social media. Just as there is supply and demand in the economy, there is supply and demand on each and every social media platform. Supply showcases how much content is being pumped out onto the platform, and demand shows how much content is being consumed on that platform. On average, when it comes down to Instagram in specific, based on a study from 2023, 33 minutes is the time that people spend on Instagram consuming content. On average, from the same study, people follow 150 profiles. So in these 33 minutes, they have to consume all of the content from those 150 profiles. They also have to answer any DMs or send any DMs that they'd like. By the way, DMs is the most used format of content consumption on Instagram. It's not stories, it's not feed content, it's DMs. They have to consume stories, which are also a massive use case on Instagram. And then they have to consume all the feed content from their followers, as well as all the feed content that's being recommended to them by Instagram. There is no way in hell people are doing all of that in 33 minutes. Which brings us to the point, which is these platforms will prioritize what's best for them. And what's best for them is to push content that keeps people on the platform for longest, because that's how they make their money. They keep people on the platform, they show ads to these people, they make money through advertisers. So understanding supply and demand, understanding that there is only a finite amount of time that people have, that's the demand, and understanding that supply is pretty much never ending, makes you start thinking on how does AI change this supply and demand ratio. And for me, it's quite clear. AI has made content creation far easier. So if we with Rob start thinking about what it was like writing carousels 5 years ago when we first began, it was hell on the earth. It was 8 hours of content creation, writing the copy, designing that, and now Canva can do this with ChatGPT in 10 minutes. So AI has absolutely shattered this supply and demand ratio, and it has lowered the barrier to entry for content creation significantly, no matter the format. Which means that nowadays there's more content than ever, and nowadays there's more noise than ever. So that makes building your personal brand and understanding what makes you and excavating and doing everything that Rob mentions so much more important. Because
Thanks, Ari.
Ready to unlock the future of brand strategy with AI-powered insights? Brand Builder is the only dedicated brand strategy platform built specifically for the next generation of brand builders. Imagine strategy processes that are intuitive, deeply insightful, and produce unique and effective strategies effortlessly for any business, with any audience, in any market. With a diverse array of strategy models, from brand strategy and marketing strategy to offer strategy and beyond, Brand Builder provides the structured path. Simply follow the steps, leverage AI-driven insights, and produce comprehensive guidelines and action plans for your clients and teams. With Brand Builder, strategy is both smart and simple. Expand your branding capabilities, enhance your services, and increase your revenue, all with a single platform. Start building smarter today with your free account at brandbuilder.ai. That's brandbuilder without the E.ai.
And Rob, your take on AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to Hrabren on this one. But really, for me, like as Hrabren said, AI has completely changed the game in how we put content out into the world. The one thing that it can never do is it can never be human. Every single response I've thrown into ChatGPT, it doesn't even matter if you ask it to be more human, it cannot be more human. It cannot speak to another person how I would speak to you, Jacob, and it would never speak to Hrabren the way I would speak to him. It just doesn't know how to do it. And so while it makes content creation so easy, without that human element, without that human eye looking over what has been created, you have a limited amount of success. And so a lot of the areas that, like Hrabren said, like, use it to make your life easier, use it to build out like your structures. But then when you look at like things like stories, be the person that shows up. Don't allow AI to create your set of stories for you. Be the one that shows up on your stories talking to people, because that's who people want to see. They don't want to hear that AI generated voice in the background with that clearly robotic language talking to them, because it's like I've heard this from 5,000 other accounts. Like, it's all the same. So be the person that shows up, and be the person that gives that fine tune into your content to make sure it feels and it looks like you. And that's where I really see the relationship between people and AI continually evolving. Right now it's a trend, and so you can put out something that sounds completely AI generated and people will absolutely lap it up and love it. Eventually it's going to lose that novelty, and it will then be kind of brushed to the wayside, and people are going to look for accounts and look for brands that can use AI in a way that makes their processes more effective, not necessarily feeling super AI, but more just pumping out the content that you need to pump out at a frequency that allows you to build your brand, but without losing that human element that people ultimately look for.
I agree, and I think that Chris Doe, sorry to interrupt you, Jacob, I think that Chris Doe has a really nice quote that summarizes this, and it's that in your relationship with AI, you should be like the chef. And just like any good chef, you're not going to be cooking something and serving it as it is. You're going to be cooking and tasting and adapting and changing and tasting again, and only then are you going to be serving it. So you should be that curator. You should be that person who feeds AI the needed ingredients, gets something back, tastes it, gives it back.
I love that.
Yeah,
point.
human plus AI. It's not just all AI. And what you said, Rob, about showing up. You guys are living that mantra, right? You guys are showing up every day, like pumping out so much content, valuable content, and the growth is there. And it's because it's such valuable content, and you give a shit about who you're targeting, your customers, and that's how you're converting and you're working with your clients. And I do want to explore that a little bit, like your process of working with clients. So just like, how would you guide them through this process of growing a following, just in a way that's going to be helpful for our listeners as well? Like, how could they go through this motion as
Okay, I'll jump in. Yeah. So for me, really understanding that that best place to kind of get started. Harry, do you mind taking this just while I have a bit more thought on it?
Absolutely. For me, it really does come down to identifying, do you have an established brand truth and brand set, or do you not have it? If you don't have it, absolutely no worries. You just need to do some foundational work before it. You need to look into things such as the big promise, which will set your positioning. You need to do your competitive benchmarking. You need to identify your content audience. From that point onwards, you can start building. I always recommend to my clients doing a 100-day sprint. Inside of that 100-day sprint, you're not really looking at insights. You're not caring about insights. You're not caring about reach. You're not caring about engagement. You're not caring about all the KPIs that I mentioned previously, because the truth is you won't really have statistically relevant information. All you care about is making posts and adapting, not simply being consistent, but being consistently adaptable. Because to be entirely honest, this advice that consistency is enough and consistency is all that matters is complete bullshit, because you can be consistently shit at something and you're never going to learn. So you have to pump out content. You have to be smart enough to identify what has made this content resonate and what hasn't. You have to actively look for feedback. If you have to, go seek out communities, whatever is needed to improve day after day. There's a really good story about Mr. Beast, which in his first 6 years, he got around 28,000 subscribers. In the following 6 years, he went from 28,000 to 153 million. So the first half of his journey shows the fact that consistency is not enough. He was consistent for 6 years, pretty much nothing changed. The second half of the journey showcases what happens when you surround yourself by people who are actually interested in growing. And he created his own mastermind, he created his own community, he was building out and sharing knowledge with other creators, and then he was expecting to receive the same level of integrity and critique for his own content. And that's the way that you improve, because the reality is we do not live in an age in which information is scarce. So anyone can go on Google, on ChatGPT, and they can search for Instagram hacks 2024, and they will get tons of short-term tactics that will work. But unless you actually understand that this information is just the tip of the iceberg, and what it really comes down is what's below the surface, and that's consistency, adaptability, and
I can hear your computer science background every time you speak, just like analytical and very much about the data, very much. I want to go a little bit deeper. So like you're talking about some of like the pitfalls, I guess, but like what's the process you would actually go through with a client? Like you mentioned positioning and doing like the inner and outer work, but like, is it just a matter of creating a strategy and doing it for 100 days, or like, what do you actually, what process are you going through with them to create a plan, for those 100 days?
Yeah. So the plan is created based on the Venn diagram that I described earlier, which is essentially your competitors, yourself, and your audience. And then based on that, we create something which I call a content matrix. That is essentially a one-pager in which we start with the goals. So what is the purpose of the content that we're going to be creating? Is the goal to attract people? Is it to nurture them? Is it to close them? In the beginning, I would say 100% of your content should be attraction oriented. And the more you grow, the more trust you with your audience, the more goodwill you build with them, the more you can allocate to the nurturing and sales phases. So that's the top. Afterwards, there are content pillars. And these pillars are entirely going to be fueled by yourself, your competitors, and your audience. And then these pillars are broken down into topics. So more specifics, if you look at the pillars in a horizontal fashion, the topics are the vertical, the deep dives. And then from that point onwards, we have formats. So we match all of the content pillars with all of the topics and then with all of the specific formats. On Instagram specifically, the formats are pretty balanced at the time of recording this in 2024. Having said that, Reels do have a slight advantage when it comes down to non-follower distribution. So the best bet for someone who is just starting out is to use all formats, but allocate a little bit more priority when it comes down to Reels. So if I had to make a recommendation for brand new profile in 2024, it would be 60% Reels, 20% carousels, 20% single images for the first 100 days. And then from that point onwards, you can read the data, you can dive into a specific format that makes sense again for yourself, for your deliverability, for your skill set, etc. And then from that point onwards is the cherry on top. I call it personality. And that's essentially leveraging what makes you you. So for example, in my branding, in the way that I speak, in the way I create content, it's all about data. It's all about no bullshit, no fluff, straight to the point. So for me, that's something which I have shaped throughout the years and I have excavated from my background as a computer scientist, performance marketer, even from the place in which I live. Because here in Bulgaria, where I was residing in, the number one thing that I learned is that Balkan people are straightforward. And thus, that was something that was engraved in who I was. So I implemented it in my branding. My name, Hrabren, literally means bravery in my native language. That's again something that I integrated, including in my first iterations of my brand, which was Brave Social Media Marketing, in the branding of my agency, which is Brave Marketing.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that story. Rob, I'll pass the mic to you.
Yeah. So again, kind of jumping off the back of what Hrabren said on the 100-day sprints, and really, really using those as an opportunity to explore what you enjoy doing is absolutely essential. So, what Hrabren mentioned about getting your content pillars together, deciding on a few topics that you can talk about, and then publishing content based on those pillars, that's great. However, don't identify your pillars and then consider them to be like, your absolute must, because they're going to change. You're going to find that, hey, actually, I'm noticing that this content pillar isn't doing it. So don't be afraid to throw things out when they're not working. Nothing that you set out at the beginning of your journey, your content pillars, even your personality. You haven't found your voice yet. So how do you know what you're actually comfortable with speaking? I remember how I used to speak when I first started, and it didn't feel like me. It had to take a little bit of experimentation to actually find that way that I wanted to talk with people in a way that felt most comfortable to me. And it was the same with the types of things that I was speaking about. I was like, okay, I don't want to talk about this anymore, so I'm going to bin that, you know. And then there was also that element of not just things that I didn't want to talk about, but there was also the element of things that I'm noticing, hey, I think I've been doing this for long enough now to understand that people don't want to hear that. So I'm going to throw that out too. So there's, especially when working with clients, it's about identifying all of those pillars. It's then about looking at the specific content around those pillars that you're going to create and then putting them into a 100-day sprint, and then going back to the drawing board and saying, all right, how did this piece of content do? How did that piece of content do? I'm going to sound a little bit like Hrabren for a second now, but you want to analyze every single piece of those content and say, okay, great, shit, great. And then you decide what needs to stay and you decide what needs to go.
Okay. And I'm just going to play devil's advocate here and say, well, what if I don't have much time, right, to create content? And how do I go about this?
For me, it's never about time. And I do understand that I'm in a blessed position in which I have employees working with me, helping with my brand. I also do understand that I'm not a parent, something which takes an enormous amount of time. But I have worked with people who are way busier than myself. I have worked with people who are way busier than myself and active parents. So for me, it really does come down to prioritization. Everyone has the same 24 hours, but not everyone uses these 24 hours the same way. So we were discussing earlier about leveraging AI and making sure that you utilize it in a smart way. That's definitely a big time saver. And then the other element which I would like to throw in here is clarity. Usually it's not a time issue, it's an issue with processes, and usually it's not an issue with processes, it's an issue with procrastination. Because you cannot build a process around something you do not understand. And that's where the role of these 100 days really comes down to. You are experimenting, you are going through the process from A to Z, you're understanding what it takes to make a single piece of content. And the first time you do something is always going to be so painful. I remember I recently started going to jiu-jitsu, and my first lesson in jiu-jitsu was pure pain. From beginning to end, I was barely able to keep up. I thought at one moment that I was going to puke everything that I had for lunch. And yet, the second time that I went in there, it was so much better. I actually was able to keep up. And now I'm a few months in, and the things that were literally making me faint are now walks in the park. It's the same with content. It's the same with any new skill you're trying to build. Something which is unfamiliar lacks clarity. Something that lacks clarity is prone to procrastination and is impossible to delegate. Something else that I do recommend to our listeners is to take a look at the Eisenhower matrix. This has been something which I have been utilizing every time that I start a new project, and it has been immensely helpful. It essentially breaks down your time in 4 quadrants. Some of the things you're going to be delegating, some of the things you're going to be removing, and then the priorities. These are the things that are the bottlenecks and you're going to be focusing on. And after 100 days, you're going to be able to figure out in your content creation journey, what is the bottleneck? What is the thing that you're actually really enjoying doing and something you wake up and you can do from beginning to end? And then what is something that you hate with passion? And then from that point onwards, you can decide, okay, can I delegate this? Because if you're both time poor,
you're really hitting them where it hurts. You know, like the procrastination, I think, is a huge part of, time, and people just don't want to do it because they don't know how to do it and aren't willing to learn and put the time in, and then things don't change, right? So yeah, I'm sorry, listeners, it does sting when you hear that. I'm going to wrap up from now. I just want to leave with some final tips from you guys on building a massive following. Like, is there any final pieces of advice that you'd love to share with our listeners?
I do have one which I recently published, and it hit home for a lot of people, and that's realizing that being an expert and being an expert at communicating your expertise are two separate skill sets. And the sooner you realize that just because you're good at something doesn't mean that you're good at communicating that thing, and the sooner you start putting effort into your actual communication, the better you're going to do. So for me, really working throughout the years with people who thrive at what they do and seeing just how many better designers there are out there, how many more talented videographers and marketers and brilliant people in general there are who are just worried by the fact that they cannot communicate on social media.
Thank you, Harry. And before I go to Rob, where can people connect with you?
When it comes down to connecting me, you can absolutely find me on Marketing Harry at LinkedIn, Threads, and Instagram. I'm also putting together a special program that's combining everything that I know when it comes down to data-driven and psychology. Rob is actually someone who is beta testing it as we speak, and that's something which I'm really, really excited about. So
thank you, Rob. That's literally what we've done with this summit, actually. Like the main phrase is become an extraordinary brand builder, and that's our positioning. And we're using the idea of the X, excited, extraordinary, and so forth as like the brand language. So it's a simple idea. Think about what your content can help someone become. So I'm going to leave it on that. Thank you so much. Rob and Harry, this was an absolute pleasure. I love your combined knowledge and thinking, and sharing so openly. So thank you so much for joining us on Building Extraordinary Brands.
Thank you so much for having us.